For joining us. The all-party group on small island developing states actually had its formal inaugural meeting a few weeks ago to elect officers, but this is our first proper public meeting, the first of which we're having a discussion of the issues that affect SIDS and climate change. I was elected chair at that meeting. So I want to thank everyone for their interest. I think it's a really important year for small island developing states, and I'm really pleased that we can use this all-party group to get issues on the agenda. Before we start, I do want to inform people that this session is being recorded, obviously because of the time difference with the island states. It's difficult for some people to be here today, so we wanted to make sure that as many people as possible could then watch it afterwards. And if you have any questions, there will be a question and answer session at the end. You can either try to get my attention and raise them when we get to that part of it, or you can post them in the chat as we go through the session. And people from my office will be taking note of that. I am delighted that we're joined today by Mohammed Nasheed, former president of the Maldives and serving speaker of the People's Majlis, and also by the UK Minister for the Pacific Environment, Lord Goldsmith. Nasheed is also the ambassador for the Climate Vulnerable Forum. I'm sure you will all remember his efforts to highlight the impact of climate change on the Maldives when he was in government and ever since. So I'm really, really pleased that he's been able to join us today. For those of you who are relatively new to this, the SIDS are 58 low-lying island nations. They were officially recognised at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 as having particular vulnerabilities, and they are represented by UN Group and AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States. I think we will hear from our speakers about the particular issues that they face, but you will know the impact of climate change, sea temperature rises, the islands generally have limited natural resources. They're often under stress from unsustainable human activities, and there's a high susceptibility to frequent and more intense extreme weather events, climate-related weather events like cyclones, tsunamis, obviously affected also by droughts, and as we've seen in St. Vincent, volcanic eruptions. They have a high dependence on marine resources, which would be very sensitive to sea level changes and rise in ocean temperatures, along with pollution, ocean acidification. So what we're hoping for at the upcoming COP26 conference are solutions brought to the table to actually address the insufficient financial, technical and institutional capacities that limit the ability of SIDS themselves to mitigate and adapt to any adverse impacts of climate change. There's issues about them struggling to access UN resources such as the Green Climate Fund. In most cases, they're not eligible for ODA. So, for example, in this country, they don't get FCDO funds. Because they're deemed to be just that little bit too prosperous, although I think many would challenge that. There's also a big question about debt relief for the island states. And finally, I'd say the representatives are pushing for support at COP for the Samoa Pathway, which is a plan to promote sustainable growth and sustainable management of ecosystems. And they need access to loss and damage funds along with other financial resources to solidify programming for their very vulnerable countries. So I think I'm going to hand over now to the speakers. There will be, as I say, our focus as this group very much at the moment is on looking ahead to things that are happening this year. It's not just COP26, it's also the CBD, the Conference on Biological Diversity, but biodiversity, but also more soon we've got the G7 meeting in Cornwall. Again, the UK is hosting it in June, which is when we'll be looking at some of the issues around debt and finance. So we're going to have a really busy programme focusing on those key points. There's other things like the Pacific Island Forum meeting. Once we get through this year, we may also then start to focus more broadly on things like the blue economy or on, for example, food supplies and sufficiency in that respect, waste disposal, all sorts of environmental issues that affect the island states. But as I say, this year the focus really is on trying to make sure the voice of the small island states are heard at the conferences that are coming up. So without further ado, I'm not sure if Zach Goldsmith has joined us yet. He did say he was going to be a little bit late, but we have our first speaker here. So it's, as I said, it's a great pleasure to welcome President Mohammed Nasheed, who is the Speaker of the Maldives Majlis, the council there, a huge champion for climate change, will be known to many people on this call. As I said, he's an ambassador for the Climate Vulnerable Forum as well. Really important voice in terms of the discussions as we lead up to COP. So over to you, President.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking to you here from the Maldives. I am very pleased that the British Parliament has taken an interest in the challenges of the small island developing states, and especially the challenges that we face with respect to climate change. I am actually not going to so much talk about how bad it is for us here in the Maldives and how drastically and rapidly the climate is changing, and also therefore the impact that it has on our livelihoods, on our nature, on our geography, on every aspect of our life. That's all true, and it's all happening. First, thank you so much, Kerry McCarthy MP, and also Lord Goldsmith for organizing this, for coming up with the all-party group, and also for having this meeting. I'd like to make 3 points in this talk. Firstly, on energy, then on adaptation, and also on the COP26. Now, on energy and carbon emission, because this is where we have a particular problem and where Britain and British companies could help. There is a problem for countries like the Maldives when it comes to deploying the big amounts of renewable energy needs so that we can quit fossil fuels. The problem is our cost of borrowing, the cost of capital. Political instability, high debt levels, and the effects of climate change have left many of us with very high borrowing costs. This is particularly a problem for renewable energy, which in effect requires the purchaser to buy 20 years worth of electricity on a single day, because almost the entire cost of renewable energy is in the equipment and installation. The cost of capital of a renewable energy project is therefore paramount to its economic viability. Fossil fuels do not face this problem because the cost of building a generator is relatively low, and the expensive part, the fuel, is bought in small amounts over the lifespan of the project. This is why many island nations, as well as bigger Asian countries, face an energy paradox. Even though renewable energy produces a unit of electricity cheaper than fossil fuels, our countries do not have access to cheap capital required to install renewable energy at the scale that we need. At the moment, the Maldives economy is largely run on imported diesel. The diesel is dirty, expensive, volatile in price, and a huge drain on our foreign currency reserves. The Maldives would like to rapidly deploy renewable energy, primarily solar, given our reputation as a sunshine holiday destination. The government recently announced a goal for the Maldives to become net zero by 2030, the world's most aggressive mitigation target. So it's not the politics holding renewables back, nor it's the economics. The cost of producing a unit of electricity with solar power is much cheaper than producing a unit of electricity using diesel. In fact, we could lower people's electricity prices if we switched to solar. The problem we face is finance. Commercial loans are subject to interest rates as high as 20% per year. This sky-high cost of capital makes renewable energy projects more expensive than they could be. And as such, the rollout of renewables is much slower than it should be. For a country like Britain, and indeed British companies, this provides an opportunity. If the British government or British banks was prepared to underwrite the risk, insure the risk of solar projects in the Maldives, that would hugely lower the cost of capital and make the projects commercially viable. We would be able to switch from diesel to solar quickly and meet our net zero targets. This, if that, is our energy problem in a nutshell. I believe that there is a low carbon development strategy. A development strategy where extraction is less and with more recycling, but with the same economic outcomes: high employment, low inflation, GDP growth, so on and so forth, but with less extraction and more recycling. The point that I'm trying to make is, to do that, we need to reduce the price of capital in developing countries. The price of capital is high here because of political instability. My Kerry McCarthy would know the 2013 election and how that was stolen from us. And because of all this, capital is high. So that's my point on energy production. And my other point was on climate adaptation. In my line of work, I meet many voters who have a view of development measured in concrete. The more concrete the government pours, the more development apparently we have, and the happier people think they are. We keep building things, from seawalls and water breakers to airports and harbors, in exactly the same way as we have done for decades. We keep using the same old technology: rock boulders, concrete, land reclamation, and then more concrete. The problem with these technologies is they are further damaging our coral reefs. Instead of working against nature, we must embrace methods of working with it. We should not be pouring concrete over coral reefs or cutting down mangroves that protect us from storms. That's why we need soft but smart biological adaptation strategies. We want to build seawalls that encourage coral reef growth. We want to grow a reef. We want to, if necessary, genetically modify the polyp and let it grow faster. And we want to grow mangroves to protect us from surges. You see, to build a water breaker in the Maldives, it costs us $8,000 a meter. That's for the rock boulders and the inside embankments. Now, we have 2,000 islands. Most of the small islands, states, have thousands and thousands of coastline. And at $8,000 a meter, no one has that money. But we can grow a reef, we can implant a mangrove. And that's actually $20 a meter. The Dutch Docklands recently announced a project to build a floating town in a lagoon near Malé, the capital city. This will not require much land reclamation, nor will it wreck the nearby coral reef. We need to embrace more of these new technologies when we think about adaptation to climate change. And the COP. It's fair to say that over the years, I've become very cynical about the COPs. I keep saying that negotiators have met each other. The last time that I went to the COP, the negotiators have got married to each other and they have children who are 14-year-old now. So that's how hard they've been working at the COP, and we now have a COP generation. When I go to the COP, country seems to be engaged in a dance. Industrialized countries go there with one aim in mind, trying to hold on to their right to pollute as much as possible, while the poor countries go there pretending to care about the climate, but in reality they are just rattling the begging bowl for aid and more money. At the end of each COP, the rich world does very little about emissions, but the rich countries promise poor countries big climate money, bribe. And everyone goes happy home. Apart from our climate, of course, because emission keeps on rising. I am speaking for a number of countries when I like to say that it's not so much aid that we should be seeking, but we should be seeking trade because we care about reducing global emissions. Of course, the rich world holds historic responsibility for climate change, and so the West is going to have to pay for that. But pay for it by cutting your own emissions and helping us to cut ours. As I said, it's not aid that we are so much looking for. What would be extremely helpful, though, are risk guarantees that would make commercial investments in renewables financeable, not aid, commercial and trade. If you could underwrite the risks of the loans that companies take to build solar power in the Maldives, that would have a huge impact. This is something that British Development or Export Credit Bank could do. We are more than happy for British companies to take advantage of such guarantees. They could come to the Maldives, invest in renewables, and make a healthy profit. Our utility companies would happily pay a good price for the solar power produced by these investments. This way, everybody could win. The Maldives will be able to install more solar power, which will make our electricity cheaper, improve our energy security, and help us meet our net zero target. Your companies could make a lot of money, and your government won't need to spend a fortune on climate aid. And the climate will win because emissions will hopefully fall. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. I thought it was very. We'll get on to questions after we've heard from Minister Zach Goldsmith, but I think it was a really interesting perspective on just, as you say, shifting things away from that discussion about our role just in giving finance and perhaps how we could be more practically engaged. And I think the figures, particularly on the seawalls and the difference it would make to come up with natural climate solutions, supporting the reef and the mangroves rather than putting lots of concrete in. I'm sure that will stick very much in everyone's minds when we're going to have a session of the APPG in a couple of months' time, specifically about adaptation and what needs to be done. And yeah, that's a really sort of helpful starting point for that. I gather that the minister, Zach Goldsmith, is here. He's shy. He's got his camera off. Oh, he's got his camera on now. That's why you were lurking on the second page of my screen. I didn't see you. But thanks so much for joining us, Zach. I know this was all arranged at fairly short notice, and but it's really good. I know that. As I think I said when I first told you I was setting up this group, if you weren't now a minister, I'm pretty sure that you would have been a vice chair of the group at least, if not a co-chair. So I know that you're definitely very supportive of this agenda. But if you'd like to sort of say a few words to us about what you see as the priorities for the year ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Brill. All right. Thanks very much, Kerry. And yeah, I'm delighted that you set this APPG up. I mean, the timing is perfect, and the need is immense, as President Nasheed has just said. So I'm really honoured to be invited to the first session, and actually even more so to follow Nasheed. He's one of, as you know, Kerry, he's one of the I think he's one of the world's great climate and environment champions. His record, both in and outside of politics and government, is second to none. He's one of those people who we must cherish. So it is a real honor to be following him, and to follow those words of wisdom that we just heard from him, and which I've benefited from many times during my time as minister. But before I start, well, look, we're talking about small island states, and in particular small island developing states. So I want to just say a few words, if I can, before we start, about the recent volcanic activity in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As you know, about 100,000 people have been affected. And I know, like everyone on this call, my thoughts are with them. And I just wanted to give a little update on what we're doing. So the government's monitoring what's happening day by day. We've pledged an initial £200,000 to the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency to help address the immediate humanitarian impacts of the eruptions. We're helping coordinate the relief effort and providing life-saving emergency supplies. We're restoring telecommunications and transport links. We're supporting immediate needs around health, agriculture, water, electricity, and we have a volcanologist on the ground. And we hope that analysis of the ash samples that we're now looking at here in the UK and UK labs will help us to determine patterns of seismic activity over the coming months. So I just wanted to just put on the record that we're doing what we can, and we're monitoring this very, very worrying situation day by day. So just moving on to the broader agenda. I do want to congratulate Kerry in setting this APPG up. For so many reasons, the timing couldn't be better. We're inextricably linked in the UK to so many of the world's small island states, not least through the Commonwealth, 25 of whose members are small island developing states. And as a UK minister with, in addition to climate and environment, I have special responsibility for our relationship with the Pacific. So I've been able to get to know many of those small island states, albeit virtually, but I've had wonderful virtual tours of some of the most interesting places on earth. And I've been able to see that so many of these small island developing states are really special places, stewards of almost a third of the global ocean, and of incredible wildlife, often endemic wildlife, so unique to each of them. But by their very nature, small island developing states are also acutely vulnerable to shocks. And as Kerry, you said in your introduction, much more so than their income level peers. And this past year has really underlined that, what should be an obvious truth. At the UK Caribbean Conference a few weeks ago, I heard more about the pressures piling up for small islands. So with natural resources, remittances, employment, tourism, government revenues, export incomes, all hit extremely hard. And the reality is that even those countries and small islands that have somehow managed to remain either completely or almost entirely free of this wretched virus have nevertheless been very disproportionately hit economically. But it goes much further than that, and much further than COVID. SIDS face existential threats on numerous fronts, in particular from increasingly degraded natural environment. For obvious reasons, the damage being done to the world's ocean has a very direct impact on small island states, much more so than other countries. And in my lifetime, marine wildlife has halved. Today, a third of marine mammals are at risk of extinction. Over 90% of the world's marine stocks are either fished at their limits or beyond their limits. And given that almost 1 billion people depend directly on fish as their main source of protein, this is not just an ecological tragedy, it's a human one. And just as quickly as we are denuding the ocean of life, we're filling it with plastic. And unless we act by 2025, plastic in the ocean will have trebled in just 1 decade. So all of this against the backdrop of an increasingly destabilized climate. And it's estimated that the ocean has absorbed around 90% of excess heat caused by human activity, up to 30% of human CO2 emissions. But clearly there's only so long that it continues to act as this sort of critically important buffer. And as the ocean becomes warmer and more acidic, living systems are going to struggle to cope. And we're already seeing that. For SIDS, the resulting sea level rise, extreme weather events, and a warming ocean are already jeopardizing food and water security. And I think it's a sobering and appalling thought, actually, that even if we manage to limit global warming to 2 degrees, and don't forget we're heading for much more than that based on current commitments, we're still likely to lose 99% of coral reefs on which I believe a quarter of marine species depend. And to compound the difficulties faced by SIDS, global support systems are not, as we just heard from Nasheed and also UK, global support systems are not tailored to their specific needs. And the combination of crisis and complex finance systems rapidly stretching their government's capacity. So it is imperative that the big global financial institutions both scale up their offer to the SIDS and ensure that climate vulnerable nations are able, most of whom are small island developing states, are able to access finance more easily. I just want to say all that I've just said, clearly it's not all doom and gloom. Like many others in the international community, we in the UK think that small island states are a special case for sustainable development. They're the case for investment in renewable technologies, as Nasheed just said, to help insulate SIDS from unexpected energy shocks or shortages is pretty obvious. Likewise, investment in productive, sustainable agriculture. And for all of us, the voice of the SIDS in global climate talks couldn't be more important, despite contributing very, very little proportionately to the problem of climate change. They're virtually all on the front line. So when they speak with tremendous moral authority, and the world must listen. And many of those small island states, despite contributing so little to the problem, are also world leaders when it comes to the solutions. So radical renewable energy programs, for example, strong, ambitious NDCs, much stronger than some of the big polluters in the world. So as COP26 presidents, we have, I think, a special obligation to ensure that their voices are amplified, and we're completely committed to doing so. And if Alok Sharma was here speaking today, he would be making very much the same point. And as one of the biggest contributors to the multilateral system, the UK has an opportunity and responsibility to ensure that their needs are met. So to that end, I'm pleased that the UK has worked hard to ensure that at least 50%, for example, of the Green Climate Fund allocations are for vulnerable countries, including SIDS, and we're pushing for that number to rise. I'm delighted that the UK will be working with Fiji and others, hopefully the Maldives, to initiate a new task force on access to finance, building on the roundtable we hosted together a few months ago. GNI, gross national income, clearly can't be the be-all and end-all of development. It's a starting point, but at best. And if we're going to take better account of the vulnerabilities and shocks and strains and success, then we need to come up we need to achieve a consensus on ways to cast our net much wider than dollar values. And that means being honest that there's more we can do to help by making finance less complicated, less burdensome, more responsive, etc. Now, we've also set up a small island developing states hub in the Foreign Office, or the SCDO as it's now called, to coordinate our approach and to improve our offer. And it's early days, but as part of that, we're adding new diplomatic posts, including 4 new missions in the Caribbean in the last 18 months, the 6th mission in the Pacific, which is about to open in May this year in Tonga. We're also, as you know, presidents of the G7 this year, and we're using that platform to increase global ambition and finance on disaster risk reduction. And we're hosting a series of consultations on the Santiago network for loss and damage, with the aim of getting the network operationalized by COP26. So just to try and round up, the UK has made tackling climate change and biodiversity a #1 international priorities. They're in the IR that was released quite recently. And because there's no pathway to tackling climate change or protecting lives and livelihoods or reversing biodiversity losses, does not involve a massive increased efforts to protect nature. We've put nature at the heart of our response to climate change, both nationally and internationally. We think nature-based solutions, like the mangroves that you were both talking about a few moments ago, could provide a third of the most cost-effective solution we need to mitigate climate change, as well as helping countries adapt to climate change. But as you know, despite that huge contribution, nature-based solutions get less than 3% of total global climate finance at the moment. So it's a priority for us this year to get other countries, other donor countries, not only to increase their international climate finance, but to increase the share of it that's invested in nature. We'll be spending nearly a third of ours on nature-based solutions. We want other countries to do similar. And on the back of our commitment, we are developing, and I'm looking looking forward for the course of this year to talking more about them, but we're developing a pipeline of really ambitious programs. A £500 million Blue Planet Fund, which is about to launch to help support the world's most fragile environments and communities that depend on them. It'll help with marine protected areas, establishing them, protecting them. It'll provide focused protection for particularly important and fragile habitats like corals. It'll support restoration of coastal ecosystems like those mangroves and seagrass and kelp. It'll tackle unsustainable industrial and illegal fishing. It'll help fight pollution on the marine environment. And then we're also expanding on the magnificent Blue Belt, which you know about, so I will not talk about. But I just would say, finally, we know that change is possible. It's a gigantic task that we face, but we know that nature protection works, both for people and planet. And you only have to look at Costa Rica. They've doubled their rainforest in a generation. They put half their country under canopy, and they've grown their economy alongside their biodiversity. So we are part of, in fact, we're leading global alliances to protect at least 30% of land and ocean by 2030. We're pushing for an ambitious new UN treaty to enable protection of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction. And we're trying to mobilize public finance other than public finance. We know there's not enough public money out there to solve these problems. So we're building alliances of countries committed to identifying perverse subsidies, committing to shift land use subsidies. For example, the $700 billion a year dished out by the top 50 food producing countries for often destructive land use. We're campaigning to get the big multilateral development banks, I think this is absolutely critical, to nature-proof their entire portfolios. There's no point having a big development bank investing a little bit in nature and a little bit in climate if the rest of the portfolio is taking us in the opposite direction. So we need to nature-proof the whole thing. And we're getting private finance flowing by accelerating progress on financial disclosures and high-integrity carbon markets. So I've probably spoken for longer than I was going to. I just would point everyone to the Das Gupta review. It's just so important. You know, it's often said that we need to get the environment into our economics, but it's the other way around. Everything we have comes from the environment. Without nature, we have no economics. We have nothing. So the challenge is reconciling the economy with nature. And that's really the crux of it. That's what we've got to do. None of us is doing enough, not one country in the world. There are leaders, but no one is doing enough. And we are committed here to continuing to step up. And I hope we'll be able to continue this discussion over the course of the year. And you can hold us to account for some of the promises that we're making. Kerry, sorry for speaking so long, but thank you.
That's fine, Zach. That was a really comprehensive overview, and we are recording it. So any promises that you've made in the course of this meeting, we'll be able to play back to you. And that I've got a number of questions that were submitted in advance, and I know that you've got to leave at 1:45, haven't you, Zach?
I'm really sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So a few of them are directed at you, but first of all, I wanted to. So the questions that we had submitted in advance, which I think are mostly about the UK government's approach, are on deep sea mining, thermal and ocean thermal energy conversion as a priority technology, and also about the UN Global Ocean Treaty, which I think you mentioned a bit. But first of all, I did want to bring in the Maldives High Commissioner, who's got a question specifically for you. So over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. I think Lord Goldsmith already know what kind of question I'm going to put because he's smiling. I'm glad, Lord Goldsmith, you raised the issue of protecting the ocean, and President Nasheed spoke about the trade. But we're still struggling to understand why the UK government keeps imposing or penalizing, if I can use a stronger word, the tax, putting a tax on the Maldives tuna, which is the most, one of the, as you yourself has said, one of the, it's a model for the way we fish to the rest of the world, and it's one of the most sustainable products, but we are still struggling, and I believe that when we would like UK to walk the talk, when you say that you want to ensure that the oceans are protected, and this is a very small thing that the UK government can do, because we are the only small island developing states that the UK has imposed a tax on from the Commonwealth, and I think this is something I would come back to the SIDS, the APPG on SIDS later on to actually try and see whatever you could do to help us. So I would really like to know how far the UK is willing to walk the talk, Lord Goldsmith.
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency, and very good to see you. And I want to just very quickly acknowledge, I think Maldives has got it provides an absolute model for the future of sustainable marine use, particularly in relation to tuna. I think that the sort of line by line mechanism necessarily prevents over-exploitation of the ocean. And if every country in the world followed the model that's set by the Maldives, our conversation today would be very different. So I'm a massive fan of what you're doing there, and I want to just recognize that. And I'm also pleased that the UK was pretty much aligned with the Maldives at the recent IOTC summit. We lost, as you know, unfortunately, and other countries, I think, engaged with less good faith. And as a consequence, we're going to have to go back and fight that battle over and over again. But I think we are pretty much aligned. In relation to the specific question about the tariffs on tuna imports, look, my view is that trade should be a force for good. You know, it often is, but it isn't always. And I would like us to be using our trade, and particularly our trade agreements, whether comprehensive or sector by sector, but our agreements in such a way that we advance those things we think are good in the world, and we inhibit those things which we think are not good. And on that basis, I am very supportive of what you're proposing. As you know, I would like the UK to be able to adjust its tariff systems in order to be able to recognize the inherent innate sustainability of the manner in which you manage your ocean. So I continue to have that discussion in government. Obviously, I can't just unilaterally declare policy, but I think you make a very, very strong case. The only thing I would say is it's not a sort of anti-Maldives measure. It may have an impact. It certainly does have an impact on the Maldives, but it's not about the Maldives. The UK has a good relationship, cherishes its relationship with the Maldives, and a lot of that's down to President Nasheed, you know, who's built this wonderful bridge between our two countries, and real mutual respect and trust. So it's not a sort of anti-Maldives thing, but I do very much take your point. I'm not going to argue with you because I agree with you, and I will continue to have that discussion in government. And perhaps you and I could talk in, let's say, 6 weeks to 2 months and see if we've made any progress.
Okay, so in terms of the questions that were submitted in advance, Louisa from Greenpeace has asked about deep sea mining. I mean, you'll know, Zach, that when we were on the Environmental Audit Committee together, we did an inquiry into this. And I also was watching I thought it was a fascinating conference last week when you spoke, and John Kerry and many others were speaking, and deep sea mining came up then. So yes, will the UK oppose deep sea mining?
So I'm very, very worried about deep sea mining, and my views haven't changed from the days we were on the committee together. I think it's a vast unknown, and I think the potential, obviously there's an upside. There'll be all kinds of minerals and resources which could be useful in helping us transition to a cleaner economy, but equally the downside, the risk, the damage that could be done could be permanent and catastrophic. So if ever there was a case for the precautionary principle, it's now. And we're being lobbied quite hard, very hard, by environmental groups who take a particular interest in this, who are asking us to commit to a moratorium on deep sea mining. Moratorium meaning obviously not a forever ban, but a moratorium until we have a regulatory system that is safe and that can guard against the kind of downside that I just mentioned. And that's very much a position that I share. So although we're not using that language of moratorium, we are nevertheless holding the line very firmly against the issuing of any licenses or allowing any activity of any sort within the context of deep sea mining, unless and until we have a proper regulatory system that is globally recognized and globally adhered to, and that's many, many years away. So I guess we're probably on the same page there. I don't pretend to be an expert at all, but I think no one is really an expert on deep sea mining. I think there are so many unknowns there that we absolutely have to be totally confident that the regime is safe before any activity happens. The last thing I'd say is that there are no, I believe, unless someone tells me I'm wrong, I don't think there are any, there was a threat of 2 licenses being submitted, applications, being submitted, but both were withdrawn. And I don't think there are any live applications at all at the moment. There is a recognition that this is a sort of very worrying and potentially fraught and risky process. So we're not having to hold back the horses yet, which I think is good news.
Okay. I'm very conscious of the need, well, partly conscious of the need, the fact that you're going to disappear in a few minutes' time, but also wanted to bring Nasheed in to answer some questions as well. But if so, I think on the Global Ocean Treaty, that's a sort of broader issue that will come in. But could you just very quickly, the more specific question on ocean thermal energy conversion, so OTEC, as a priority technology. Is that something that you know whether the UK government support is likely to be available for that?
Kerry, the truth is I don't know. And I really don't. I wouldn't be able to give you a decent answer on that. But I will certainly put that to BASE, who obviously this is in their remit, and I'll make sure the APG is given an update. I know I have colleagues on the call, so I'll ask them to help me remember to do that. Just very quickly on the BBNJ negotiations that we are pushing. We, as you know, we're leading the 30 by 30 campaign. We can't get 30 by 30 really without an agreement or mechanism for establishing protected areas in the high seas. So this really matters. And I talked about it to John Kerry when I saw him a few weeks ago. I talk about it to any country that I think has a sort of stake in this. And I think there is a growing consensus of the need for action, but as you also know, there are plenty of countries that do not play with a straight bat when it comes to ocean politics. So, you know, I really hope that we'll be able to deliver a solution. I think it's absolutely essential that we do, and we will do everything we can to deliver that consensus. But we've got a lot of heavy lifting to do. I don't know what Nasheed's view is on that, but I suspect his view is pretty much the same as ours.
Okay, yeah, and I think having John Kerry now in post is a really positive development. Yeah, he was definitely so good in terms of the Oceans Commission during Obama's time. I know we've got Lorian from, I think it's from Global Witness, with a question now, and I do want to bring in Nasheed as well, but I'm just conscious. I think we get Lorian. Would you like to ask your question in person, and then we'll try and bring both speakers in if they're still here. So yeah.
So not Global Witness, but the advocacy team. But thank you, Kerry, for coming to me. Minister, thank you so much for outlining the UK's response so far to the volcano in St. Vincent. The initial contribution of 200,000, I think I might say it has been a disappointment for many of us in the Caribbean diaspora. It's less than the diaspora has mobilized ourselves, and it's less than the neighbouring island of St. Vincent, of St. Kitts and Nevis has contributed, and their GDP is a fraction of the UK's. So does this say something about the UK's commitment to the region and commitment to the crisis? And can we expect further support from the UK, in particular more ambitious financial support in the coming weeks and months?
Thank you very much. No, look, I mean, there are other ways in which we're also, am I on mute? Sorry. No, there are other ways in which we're also providing support. So the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, they put $1 million in response to the eruptions, and we're obviously a long-standing supporter. UK is one of the largest donors in the world for humanitarian responses across the globe. And we contribute to the International Federation of the Red Cross Disaster Relief Emergency Fund, the DREF, which has put another £210,000, £209,000 into the Red Cross response. And there are other avenues as well through which UK support has reached the area. I'm not going to say that enough is being done. This is an unfolding situation. We don't know where it's going to end up. It's still, you know, there are still unknowns there. But I will certainly convey, if the impression or if the need is significantly higher than what is currently being received, then I will convey that back to colleagues in the Foreign Office, and I'll ask them to look again at the levels of support that we're offering. But it's not just the 200,000. Obviously there are lots of channels through which. It's one of the problems of multilateral funding is that it's invisible, but it is there, and I think we are the biggest, if not the second biggest, contributor to the multilateral development system.
Thank you very much for that. I did see that in response to a question that a written question I put down, that the government has at least put a moratorium on St. Vincent repaying debt to us, which I think is.
You're right. I should have mentioned that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
But I would use that as the basis for then sort of making a plea in terms of looking at other debt owed by the small island states when it comes to the G7. But President Nasheed, I wondered if you wanted to come in on the 30 by 30 initiative and the UN Global Treaty, and if you have to disappear, Zach, then we'll acknowledge that. And thank you
I do have to, so I'm going to peel off now because it's 1:45, and I'm really, really sorry about that. I'm happy to come back to talk about holding me to the promises that I made. I just want to say goodbye to Nasheed as well, if I could.
Well, hello, Zach, and thank you. Lovely seeing you again.
Good to see you. We'll speak soon, I hope.
Hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, Nasheed. So the floor is yours.
Yes, what was the question?
Well, we did have one question that was specifically, this is from Louisa at Greenpeace, that she's talking about, well, in the chat, I'll read out what's now posted in the chat. It says, current governance of the global oceans is outdated, ineffective, and profoundly unjust. It allows a handful of governments supporting narrow corporate interests to exploit ocean resources. How will the UK work with SIDS to secure a strong global ocean treaty at the UN that can transform ocean governance and provide long-term support so that governments and scientists from SIDS can fully participate in this international effort to protect the global oceans? And we obviously have heard from the Minister as to the UK's view on this, but as a representative of one of the island states, what's your take on it?
Okay, thank you, Minister. Now, how would the UK work with us on making our oceans sustainable? First, the deep ocean and the deep ocean fishing, which would be tuna and then yellowfin tuna and then your normal tuna. Now, the accepted or the received fishing method presently is by perseining and having huge factory vessels that go out and then completely mop up the seabed of the ocean that picks up everything. Every living species that comes across these huge nets. Now, we need to regulate fishing type as much as regulating fish catch. There is an international push and also a Greenpeace push to regulate the catch. Our suggestion has been to regulate or to limit the catch. Now, they want to limit Indian Ocean tuna catch by 80,000 tons a year. We agree. What we are saying is, to do that, we should regulate fishing methods. We should teach everyone how to fish one by one. Now, for instance, Mauritius and Seychelles and Comoros and the other Indian Ocean islands, they have rented their fishing seas to other countries at very low prices. And these other industrialized countries come and do their fishing by perseining. For instance, Seychelles gets about $100 million from their fishing industry, while we get $2.5 billion because we fish ourselves, we process the thing, and we try to sell it. So we're not only doing it one by one and in a more sustainable manner, we are also getting more money for our fish. So I think one of the things that the UK government can do with small islands is A, work in the Indian Ocean Tuna Conference and in the World Trade Organization in trying to regulate fishing type and fishing method. Another would be to educate, to develop pole and line fishing industries in East Africa, in the case of Indian Ocean, in East Africa and the Indian Ocean island states. Now, for instance, Bangladesh, they don't have big trawlers. India doesn't have big trawlers. But Sri Lanka doesn't have big trawlers either. But they don't also fish like we do. We could teach them how to fish. We could teach the rest of the world how to fish and then get more money out of it. Still come up with the same fishing effort. What I'm saying is, what I'm suggesting to the Spanish, for instance, is, look, our efficiency is better than your ship, but we do one by one. In a sense, the returns that we get from our investments are far bigger than your huge factory vessels. So I would suggest you could do two things. One is to work with us to regulate fishing type. Two, work with us to promote pole and line fishing industries in Caribbean islands, in the Pacific Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. The small islands have rented out our seas. Maldives is the only country that is using it. Our economic zone is bigger than England. It's bigger than Saudi Arabia because we are a big ocean state. So I think, please let's develop a global pole and line fishery industry for all the small islands?
Great, thank you so much for that. We've got a number of parliamentarians on the call. I know we've got, in terms of MPs, we've got Matthew Offord, Alex Sobel, Barry Gardner, Anna McMorrin. We did have Chris Elmore, I think he's had to go. And we've also got Lord Randall from the House of Lords. I wondered if any of you had questions for Nasheed.
Well,
Anna's got a hand up.
You can put your questions to Zach as well to me. I'll try to answer them.
Yeah. So Anna McMorrin, Anna.
Thanks very much, Kerry, and really great to be on this all-party group. It's really great, and thank you very much. Really good to hear from the President, to hear what he has to say, and good to hear what Zach is saying. But I'm the Shadow Minister on International Development, but with responsibility for international climate. So I'm doing a lot of work at the moment, speaking to people across the world about the impacts felt by vulnerable communities. And that includes small island states, of course. And we've heard from yourself how that impacts you. And in this year of COP, that's when we need to see that UK leadership chairing the process, being the leaders in the room and bringing together. And I suppose my question really is, we know that the finance isn't adequate. We know that there isn't going to be that commitment wasn't met for the 2020 target from the Paris Climate Agreement. And also there isn't that fair balance between adaptation and mitigation. But also we're just not seeing the seat at the table, the voice in the room of those most impacted by climate. And, I like to make the similarity, draw that similarity between what we're seeing across the world with this pandemic, fighting COVID, and the interlink, the connection between the world on the pandemic and climate as well, which we know, unless we all tackle climate change, then we know that's it. We're not going to find any solutions. But I know from speaking to so many people, so many vulnerable communities, that you have the solutions. You have the solutions there, and that's what we need to see, your solutions brought to the table, not to be told. So to get the adequate finance that you need and to get your seat at the table, to be listening for that. But I'm afraid, I'm really concerned about the lack of the UK commitment and leadership on this. So just really a comment from me, but also to thank you very much. And I hope, thanks Kerry for starting this, and we can continue this conversation up to COP and beyond, because G7 we know is coming up in the UK. That's going to be a vital time to get those finance commitments as well from the UK government. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. And before I ask Nasheed to respond to that, there is also a question in the chat from David Hillman, which I think is fairly related to this. He's from Stamp Out Poverty, and he talks about the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events that pose enormous economic costs to SIDS. So I know when I was in Grenada recently, they were still recovering from tropical storms that hit their nutmeg crop like a decade previously. It takes a long time for crops to recover. But the question from David is about it basically says that a growing number of NGOs worldwide believe that loss and damage to affected countries and communities ought to be a metric for the success or failure of COP26. And he asked what the UK government is doing about that. But I wondered, Nasheed, if you wanted to say something about, your expectations on that front. It links very closely with what Anna was saying, and actually what Zach was saying about there being a sort of a moral authority on the part of the SIDS, that they are most affected. They contribute very little in terms of global climate change. And I noticed, you were talking at the very start about changing your the climate, the carbon footprint of the Maldives by switching to renewable energy, which I think is it's a very fine aspiration on your part, but at the same time, it's the fossil fuel use of the rest of the world that is causing a lot of the problems in the Maldives. So we certainly wouldn't want to put all the onus on small island states. We're not just saying that you need to sort of clean up your own act. It's like, what do you feel that we owe you in terms of loss and damage?
Thank you very much. My friend Mark Linus had this, he came up with the word carbon sequestration, and then later on he started playing with it, and then finally came up with this idea of becoming carbon neutral. And in 2009 I was convinced by him that we can actually do it, that we can become carbon neutral. Now your question, the minister, the shadow minister, thank you so much for being part of this group, having joined the group, the Small Island Developing States and the all-party parliamentary group for that is very, very, very necessary. Now, what can the UK do? On mitigation, I suggested that the United Kingdom tries to underwrite the risks of our investments in renewables. I'm not suggesting, I'm not asking for aid. I don't think it would work. I would rather, if you find a mechanism where either your companies or our companies have an insurance on the investments. Now that would reduce the interest rates in the bank. That would also give us better facilities and rates from the banks, and that would allow the investments to grow. On adaptation, on mitigation, that's the only thing that we are asking. It's a done thing. The Foreign Office does it all the time. Minister of Trade does it all the time. You underwrite our loans very often. And so I think, somehow a mechanism to do that. The other thing is natural adaptation. Please don't give us money to pour concrete over our reefs. The World Bank is funding all these concrete projects. And this technology is from the 1930s and 20s. This same technology is imposed on these very fragile islands. And it doesn't work. It stops sand migration. It stops everything. It doesn't work at all. So what Britain actually should be doing is pushing the international financial system to work on natural and biological adaptation measures. Don't work against nature. We will fail. The water will come. Let's live with it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone else we've got a couple of minutes left we've maybe got time for one more question if someone's brief. But there's one more in the chat and then we'll take that. So this is Kat from Christian Aid. How concerned are the Maldives and other SIDS by the framing of carbon neutrality this is quite a complicated one, by the framing of carbon neutrality, net zero, when the fossil fuel companies and others are using it to call for delays in the hope of future techno-fit? Okay, right. So it's that question about, it's basically about to what extent can you pin your hopes on future technological developments? And I think this is something you see in aviation, for example, when they talk about the development of aviation fuels and, the whole carbon capture and storage type debate, as opposed to using nature-based solutions. What's the balance that needs to be struck?
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very dangerous, Kerry. And I'm talking about far more dangerous things. We want to grow the reef and quickly. We want to substitute that reef as a water breaker. And to do that, we need to grow it quickly. Now, what I'm suggesting then is genetic modification of the polyp. We need the science for that. Even if all of us go to bed tonight and never wake up, the world is still going to heat up to the extent that it would damage the coral reefs. So we need to find solutions in the next 10, 20 years on finding a resilient coral that would survive climate change. And so we need the science for that, and we need the research for that. We need some money into your own universities, not ours necessarily. Of course, a little bit to ours would help, but we need a lot of money into your own universities. People in Bangor, people in also Southampton, all sorts of places must be looking at how the coral grow. You know, we are quite happy to plant a tree and water it, and sometimes throw a little bit of fertilizer on it. But we're not doing that to the reef because we don't see it. So the answer to your question is natural adaptation measures, and let's spend some more money on science to see how nature works.
That's really interesting, actually. That's not something that I'd come across before. And I think, having been diving in the Maldives, and, it's beautiful, but I don't think it's what it was when people would have been, diving there, like, say, 30, 40 years ago. And I would absolutely love to see the sort of reef restored, and, the just sheer level of biodiversity of underwater life come back. So that's fantastic. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I appreciate it's quite late at night where you are, I think. So, but thanks so much for your time. And this is an ongoing conversation. As I said, it's the first real meeting of the group. I'm pleased to see quite a number of parliamentarians on the call, and a lot of interest from NGOs. So please do keep in touch with us, and if there's ever anything specific, I'm sure there's a few issues that people on the call will be taking up, the tuna, the deep sea mining, what you've just been saying about the reefs, and many other issues, as well as contributions from other people about things like St Vincent and the broader agenda. But thank you so much again for your time, and thanks everyone else for coming. And there is a Twitter account for the All Party Group SIDS, and we will make the recording available via that. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone in England. Keep safe.
It's a real pleasure.
It's not late. It's Ramadan. It's 4 in the afternoon, so it's going to be breakfast time soon. And it's I would like to say to tell everyone in Britain to keep safe from COVID, and we are going to survive that. We are going to have happier times. And to all my friends there, look, I'm going to get back there. And do you know that they're opening up the pubs on 17th of May, which is my birthday? But thank you.
That's my mother's birthday as well, so I'm taking her out to celebrate.
Right.
So that's great. So
Philippa, thank you so much.
Oh yes, thanks to Philippa for helping us organise this and putting us in touch. She's been phenomenal behind the scenes. And yeah, I didn't realise actually the time. I thought the time difference was greater between us and Maldives. But so I'm glad that the timing's worked out quite well in terms of Ramadan, and that you can now get something to eat soon. So thank you again.
Thanks so much, and bye.
Okay, bye.